practice. As a psychologist, Keith has one aim: to help people to enjoy life. Keith's session today is taking charge of stress, practical tools to help you to remain calm and relaxed regardless of the pressures. Over to you, Keith.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to get straight into it from sunny Wellington here. And what I can't, because you haven't got you live, I'm going to have to tap into your imagination. So first of all, it's gone the wrong way. Come back. That's a good start to a stress conference when it goes wrong. So I'd like to tap into your imagination. I'd like you to imagine that you're at a large conference. And remember the good old days, we had those? And I ask you a question. I'd like you to think about an embarrassing experience, or one that would be embarrassing, and get in touch with what it felt like inside. What was your heart doing, what you're doing in your stomach, and just dwell on that for a second. And then I say, I'm going to get one of you to come up the front and tell the group about that experience. Now, the fascinating thing at that point, I generally lose eye contact with virtually the entire conference. And I ask the question, does anybody feel a change occur in their body? And usually a whole lot of hands go up. Now, the key point I'm making here is that I can talk about stress for ages, but without that change that people have experienced inside their bodies, it's difficult to work out or to understand exactly what I'm talking about. Because when we boil it down, there is actually no such thing as stress. And we can't cut someone open and say, look, you got 200 grams of stress. But there is a thing called the stress response. And the stress response is a biochemical change that takes place in the body under certain circumstances. And this poor woman here, you can see she's wired up to a polygraph, a lie detector. And what it's measuring is all those physiological changes. So, lie detectors don't detect lies. They detect changes in the body. And you've got to work out what they mean. And if people say you can beat the lie detector, believe me, I've seen them operating, and you have to be really good to beat those. But that change that's occurring in the body, we'll look at what that's there for. And basically what that is the fight or flight response. And that's a change in the body that prepares you to protect yourself or to escape. And most people have heard about the fight or flight response. So when we look at what actually it's there for, I was running a workshop and this guy told me he was fishing off sea rocks up north of Auckland. He was on a ledge quite close to the sea, and his mate was on a ledge higher up behind him. And he had his back to the sea, sorting out his fishing tackle and doing baiting his hooks, etc., start fishing. And next thing, his mate just screamed at him to look out. And he turned around, and here was this huge wave coming in. Now, he leapt up the cliff behind where he'd been and just hung on for dear life. And the wave basically came right around his neck, so he'd almost certainly been washed off and drowned. When he took stock of the situation, he was hanging on with one arm. His feet were just pressed against the cliff face. In his other hand, he was still holding his surf casting rod. He was a Westpac accountant who knew the value of money. He dropped back down. His mate said to him, how the hell did you do that? And he tried running at it, jumping at it, and he couldn't get near it. But that's what the stress response is there for. It's there to save our life in an emergency. But when we look at a practical definition of stress, we've got these components. We look ahead into the future, and we don't like the look of what's coming up. And we get a physical and emotional change. I don't know how many of you ever sat there looking at a pile of paperwork, a deadline. I got an email yesterday from a client saying, where's that report you promised us? So I got that finished at midnight. But the key thing, we look ahead and we don't like the look of what's coming up. But we can look ahead and we like the look of what's coming up. So bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, Game of Thrones, you name it. But the change in the body is basically the same. So with the functional model of stress, if we look at it, there's those three components. You look ahead in the future. This can be very short term. You're about to pull out into the traffic and suddenly you realize you haven't seen a bus coming. It could be medium term. A client, you've got to front up to, in the witness box, or you've got to cross-examine someone in a difficult case, or it could be long term. Where's your future going? And you don't like it, and we get the change. Now, we see this happening in a simple thing like watching a rugby match or a netball game. If the team that you're supporting is winning and your heart's going faster, you like the look of what's coming up, and it's fantastic, and then all of a sudden your player gets sent off or red carded or something goes wrong, and now your team's losing. And now we don't know what's coming up, but still get the same change. It's really interesting. You know, after I finished my degree, I spent 12 years in the Air Force as a psychologist. And during my time there, a pilot was referred to me because he'd developed a fear of heights. Now, there's a limit to how many flights you can do, 12 feet. And this guy was a very experienced helicopter pilot. But as the chopper got higher and higher, he got a full-blown panic attack. So I put him through a bunch of tests. He came out clean. I said, you developed a flying decompensation syndrome. And he said, oh, that sounds really bad. I said, no. To get onto an aeroplane, you have to put together two incompatible things. One is the will to live. The other is the recognition you're getting into a life-threatening environment. If anything goes wrong at 30,000 feet, there's not much you can do about it. The brain put those together and you fly. I said, you've just decompensated. The brain's not going. The brain's saying, what am I doing up here? This is crazy. I've got a wife and kids. And he said, oh, what am I going to do? And I said, look, when's your next flight? He said, I've got to go up tomorrow. I said, I want you to sit back in the cockpit. I want you to just feel your heart racing, feel the sweat running down your back. Just get off on that adrenaline rush. And he looked at me and he said, but why? And I said, because people pay bloody good money for it. You're getting it for nothing. In fact, they're paying you. I mean, how good does this get? Anyhow, he wandered out of my office looking a bit, I could see him thinking, psychs, idiots. And this is down in Christchurch. And the next day he came up to my office and he said, I've just had the most exhilarating flight of my life. He said, I thought you were talking rubbish. But he said, give it a go. And he said it was just a real buzz. After that, he had to go higher and higher and higher to make it work properly. So it sounds bizarre, but if you're going to do public speaking or if you're going to do something that you feel really stressed by, it's amazing if you start playing around with that reaction and simply saying, right, I feel my heart going faster. I'm going to really enjoy it while it lasts and make it go as long as I can. When we look at the changes, and I'm covering this stuff pretty quick because it's normally a one-day workshop, but look at what the stress response is all about. And we look at these two animals here. The baboon has to fight the leopard off in order to survive, and the leopard has to kill the baboon in order to eat. But you look at the changes occurring in those animals' bodies. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these changes because I haven't got time, but the important ones, the first and ones in red there, that you switch off the thinking part of your brain. And you think, well, that's crazy. Why would you do that? But think of that guy fishing off the sea rocks up north of Auckland. If he'd stopped to think about it, he would have been dead. And so it's a wonderful system for dealing with emergencies. It's not a very helpful system if you're sitting in an exam and you're a bit worried and the brain decides to turn it off. Or if you get into an argument and it's after the argument, you think of all the clever things you could have said. And so this is a classic example of where that gets switched off. And just to make matters worse, the emotional part of the brain gets more activated. And this is why people fly off the handle, burst into tears, or even start giggling. We get an increase in muscle tension. I'll come on to that in a minute. And we also breathe faster. And so when you start to breathe faster, you get dizzy and lightheaded. And the other thing is if you are being stalked by one of these big cats, the dumbest thing you can do is to go to sleep. And so the brain will try and keep you awake, which is why if you want to really, you've got a busy day coming, you've got an important event, you want a good night's sleep, and the brain's just going round and round and round. The body's just doing what it's paid to do. But the problem is when we overuse this response, they turn into symptoms. I'll explain that in a minute. But things like tension, headaches, diarrhea, excessive wind, rumbling gut, that's irritable bowel syndrome. And if you look at the right-hand side, dizziness, all these things here are coming from increased muscle tension. And so that, I don't know if we've got any jigglers there. If you're watching TV and you're sort of jiggling away, you can't do that if you're truly relaxed. And so what happens is a huge number of the symptoms that GPs see are coming from that overuse of the stress response. Now, the sleep difficulties is a classic. In indecisions, not a big decision like whether we should, blow Iraq off the face of the planet. It's what to have for tea, what to wear, procrastination, inability to concentrate. These are a lot of the symptoms the psychological ones that are tied in with the stress response. But here's the interesting thing. How do events in the external world bring about a biochemical change in our body? So workload, deadlines, conflict, all these sorts of things. How did they bring about a change in our body? And so when we look at what happens, this anxiety loop, if you have a really stiff cup of coffee, the good Turkish stuff, you get an adrenaline rush, it feels great, and the body switches down. If there's a loud explosion, you'll get those changes. If you go to work out in the gym, again, the body changes, or if you do skydiving or whatever. And when these events happen, the body, we interpret them either as being neutral or being positive. But the body wants to shut it down as quickly as possible because the body's not designed to sustain the stress response. If you look at what happens in nature, there's a wonderful book by Robert Sapolsky called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And he said the reason the zebras don't get ulcers is because when they're being chased by a lion, they run like hell. When they're not being chased by a lion, they eat grass. But let's take a situation where you're starting to worry about something. You get that change in your body, you feel that somatic change, but then we interpret this as negative. And then we start to go into a loop worrying about how we're feeling. Because we're the only animal that can override the body's shutdown mechanism. I mean, your dog doesn't lie there at night thinking, we have to go for a walk in half an hour. And I disgraced myself out to number 37 the other night, and the wee bitches there tonight, what am I going to do? And I was checking his watch. They just react to what's happening here and now. We can think about events that happened in our past and trigger the response, or events in our future that trigger the response. The animals can't do that. And so this is the thing that turns a response that's designed to save our lives into something that can ultimately kill us. So the question is, how do you break that worry cycle? Now, one of the exercises I get people to do, and I haven't got time to do it here, but I get people to write down what they're worrying about, and then I get them to worry as hard as they can about the thing they've written down for 2 minutes. But they have to keep it going for 2 minutes. And they can't think of solutions, because if they think of solutions, they won't be worrying. So basically, they have to keep it going. It's amazing how few people can actually do that. Because if you're trying to stop worrying, it will typically get worse, because that implies you don't control it. But the moment you force yourself to do it, you've actually taken control. So one of the key, it's a very simple tool, but it's a remarkably effective one in terms of dealing with worry. So if you've worried about something, just jot it down, set your timer on your clock, and keep it going for 2 minutes. Because worry is not planning. People confuse the two. I mean, worry is repetitive, it's illogical, stays inside your head, you focus on problems, you lose perspective, whereas planning is, you only do it once, you don't do it over and over again. It's a logical process. You use a whiteboard or a bit of paper, you don't keep it in here, and it's solution focused, etc. I mean, you're happy to pay, if you've got a builder doing some work for you, he says, a bit of planning involved, that'll take me a day. And, I haven't done one of these jobs before, for a long time, bit of worry, so it'll cost you another $5,000. And you think, whoa, hang on. Happy to pay for your planning, you do your worrying on your own time. So the two are very different. But so when we come to the linkage, so what is it that links the external world with the internal world? And it's the way we talk to ourselves. And this is really, really interesting, because nothing in the external world of itself can bring about a biochemical change in your body. You have to tell yourself something about it in order to bring about that change. And 50,000 years ago, things with long, sharp teeth got that stress response going. But we've run out of saber-toothed cats, and we've had to find a new predator. And the predator we've discovered is our ability to talk to ourselves. So when I look at people who've got stress-related issues, you listen to the conversations they're having with themselves, and you find that they're actually predating themselves. They've taken themselves hostage, as it were. And I love this definition from Bill Crawford. He wrote Life from Top of the Mind. He's got this 4 15-minute video clips called Chaos to Calm, and the guy's Bill Crawford. But he defines stress as data that gets sent to the wrong place. And what he means by that is that we see things and we hear things, but it goes through the should evaluator. And, we expand that slightly: should, shouldn't, must, mustn't, fear, unfair. And if the should gets violated, it goes to the fight, flight, or freeze department. If it's not violated, it goes to the analyze and solve department. So it's that should evaluator that determines whether something's stressful or not stressful. The next question I've got for you is, how many of you have been hypnotized? And you might say to me, well, or some of you may have been, but some of you, and those of you who say you haven't, are you sure? And you ask this question: have you driven from point A to point B and you can't remember part of the trip? Or have you walked into a room to do something, and when you get into the room, you can't remember why you went there? And people say it's a memory problem, but it's not. You've actually gone into a trance state. And whenever you check your phone, for example, people look at their phones, they enter a trance state. It's that focused attention. Now, those of you who've got kids, what happens? Got a glass or something, and you say to the kid, "Hey, watch you don't spill your drink," and next thing it goes over. Now, what causes that? How does that happen? And so, when we look at how the subconscious operates, or how the brain operates, not the subconscious, we've got these three components. We've got the conscious mind. And the conscious mind is your awareness of who you are, what you're good at, who you like, who you dislike, what your values are. And it's the verbal part of the brain, the parts that while you're listening to me now, you're talking to yourself. Probably don't know what you're saying to yourself. We won't go there. And then we've got the subconscious or the unconscious, depending on how you want to call it. But this is the part of the body that's keeping your heart going at the right speed, processing the lunch, maintaining upright, just all that stuff happening you have no awareness of. And then we have the body that carts these other two bits around. Now, we think that the conscious mind controls the body. If I want to snap my fingers, I just do it. It's easy. But the reality is I have no idea which part of my brain controls that. I have no idea which nerve fibers carry it backwards and forwards down my arm. I have to go through the operating system. Now, one of the problems we have is we think about the kid and the drink. If a parent says, "watch you don't spill the drink," the only picture that the child can create is a picture of the drink being spilled. Now, the kid doesn't want to spill the drink because they know they're going to die a gruesome death if they do. And as long as their conscious mind retains control, that's fine. But as soon as it gets diverted, something happens outside or whatever, then they're running to have a look. Next thing, there's drink everywhere. The parents going, "I told you not to spill the drink," and the kid's brain's going, I got that, yep, done that. Now, the problem is the subconscious will try and deliver on the picture whether it is good for you or not. And this is really, really important. And I was running a workshop up in, I think, Victoria University. And a woman said, "Oh, no," she said, "that's what happened to me." Her leg was in plaster from her hip down to her foot. I said, "Well, what happened?" She said, "Oh, my son was teaching me to ride a 50cc scooter on this big flat open paddock. And I was pretty nervous about the whole thing. My son said, 'Look, Mum, it is perfectly safe. The only thing you can hit, for heaven's sake, is a fence. That's a kilometre away. Just don't hit the fence, all right?' She said, 'Don't be stupid. I won't hit the fence.' She started riding around. She got the hang of it. That was going really well. Then the back wheel slipped on some damp grass. And then she panicked. Now, she kept the bike upright, but it wobbled all over the place. But when she panicked, the stress response switched off the thinking part of her brain. The subconscious just went, 'Oh, yeah, what's next? Hit the fence here, sweet as.' Had she gone the way she was going, she would have gone in some long grass manuka and just stalled. But what happened? She did a sharp turn, came back past her son and his mates, and headed off across the paddock. And they watched her thinking, wonder where she's off to. And suddenly they thought, the fence. And they ran after her screaming, 'Stop, Mum, turn.' It didn't get to her in time. She hit the fence, totaled the bike over the handlebars, compound fracture the leg. She said to this day she has no memory of that trip across the paddock, and yet her son said she was like an Exocet missile. They knew exactly where she was going. And so I do a lot of safety training, and it's amazing how often I say to people, have you seen an experienced tradie do something really dumb? And it's amazing how often and the person has no idea. But then often it was a don't message. And I spotted this. They're doing some work on a swimming pool nearby, and I was driving past and I saw the sign on the fence. And when you read that, "Please don't hurt yourself today," what is the first thought that comes into your mind? You know, I mean, like, would tomorrow be okay? I mean, I don't know who designed that system, but you know, it creates all of the wrong pictures. Now, when you look at how it functions, our pictures are our software or mindware, call it what you will. And all of you will have different pictures for different parts of your life. I don't know how many of you have a good picture of you as a ballroom dancer, or as a public speaker, as a time manager, as a stress manager. And we go through all these different things. And these pictures determine how we think, feel, and act. And some of these pictures are pictures we feel good about, but others are pictures we don't feel so good about, and we try and change our behavior. But the problem is, and you know, I was dealing with a couple, and they always end up fighting. And so they had all this counseling on how to be nice to each other. So what happened next weekend, they're sitting there and the first hour goes by and they're really nice to each other, and this next hour goes by, nice to each other. But what's happening is the behavior is moving away from the picture. And so something has to give. Imagine a rubber band between these two here. Should have got rubber bands from over there. Excuse me. And so what happens, Emile Coué said, when the will and the imagination are in conflict, it's always the imagination which wins. And so what happens is the behavior gets dragged back to the picture. I mean, we used to run time management courses and teach people all these wonderful time management tools. And they're doing them for a few weeks, and then bingo, they're right back to where we started, because we realized what they weren't changing was the underlying message: they'll never have enough time. Now, the way Kua illustrated this, I thought was really clever. He said, if we put a plank on the ground, anyone can walk along that plank. Don't even think twice about it. But now if we said, now walk along that edge there without any ropes, any safety nets, any harnesses, people are going, no way. I mean, when it's on the ground, you don't get a picture of falling. Don't even think about it. But when it's up here, I think, oh, I mustn't fall. So anyhow, the subconscious is creating the wrong pictures. And so this is the really important part, is you can try and change behavior, but if you don't change the underlying picture, you simply end up back where you started. And so we look at, where does this stuff come from? And it comes from a process of self-hypnosis. So when I say, have you been hypnotized? The reality is that we live in a permanent state of hypnosis. I was working with a girls' school. There were 200 girls, and I said, hands up those of you who love maths. And out of the 200 girls, about 6 or 7 hands went up. And so there was 190 girls who were telling me they don't like maths. So when they walk into a maths classroom, they switch off, shut down, don't persist, not because they're bad at maths, but because they're bad at software. And so we start to look at the messages we feed ourselves. I never have enough time. I always leave things to the last minute. I can't work with that idiot. I'm hopeless on names, hate public speaking. One woman says she swore she'd never talk to her girls the way her mother talked to her sister and her. And she said the other day, girls are playing up. My mother was screaming at them. And I thought, how does she do that all the way from Brisbane? And when I finished my wee outburst, one of my daughters said, gosh, Mum, you sound just like Nana. Because when she thinks I don't be like my mother, the subconscious will start creating that picture and tipping the balance in that direction. And just to make matters worse, we hypnotize ourselves, but we can do it to others. So saying to kids, you're messy, you're untidy, you should be living in a tip, end up just like your father, bloody useless, how to get such a stupid child, or even domestic arguments. I know none of you have any of these, but a domestic argument is a mutual imprinting session. It's when two people take it in turns to imprint on each other what they're doing wrong, and then wonder why they keep doing it. Like one guy keeps telling his wife she's always late, and she keeps telling him he's thoughtless and inconsiderate. They're never going to change as long as they keep re-hypnotizing each other. But the beautiful thing about this, though, is the subconscious, and most of our behavior is habit-driven. And I'm not going to try and do it, but on workshops, I get people to put their hands on the table and then tell the person next to them when they fold their arms right over left or left over right. Most people don't know. It's just a habit that we've got into. But the key thing about this, and so we actually, it's hardwired into the brain. So the key thing about this, though, is the subconscious has got no connection with the outside world. And for the subconscious, reality is imagination times vividness. Now, it sounds a bit, hypothetical, but think of this. If you have a morbid fear of spiders, or wetters, we'll stick with spiders, wetters are nice, and someone says to you, oh, there's a spider crawling up your back, and they're just having you on. There's nothing there. But next thing, your heart's going faster, you may be sweating, getting a full-blown stress response, and yet there's nothing there. And what this means, you can put anything into the subconscious that you so choose. When my eldest daughter was 13, she had to do a talk in front of class. She had to write a wee speech. So she wrote the wee speech. We got the video camera out. We practiced it. That looked good. Went off to school, got home that night. How'd your speech go? Oh, it's terrible, she said. Well, what happened? I was waiting for my turn. I kept thinking I mustn't forget the opening line. Disaster. 6 months later, the class had to do it again. And she wanted to get the camera out to practice. And I said, no, we'll do it by imprinting. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I won't say 30 times every morning and 30 times every night, I'm thrilled how well my speech went. And she said, but I haven't done it yet. I said, I know that. I won't say 30 times, I'm thrilled how well my speech went. And like a good 13-year-old, she looked me right in the eyes. She went, hello, anybody home? And so I said, look, I'm your father, you're my daughter. This is what you're going to do. See, normally we look ahead and we hope something's going to go all right. So if you're playing golf, I hope the drive goes straight. I hope this meeting goes okay. I hope the speech goes okay. But we allow the doubts to creep in, and this is the big danger. What I was saying to my daughter was going to go ahead in the future, and we're going to look back and imprint onto the subconscious what happened. Because it's the subconscious that controls the body, and yet the subconscious has no connection with the outside world. So she said, oh, okay, I'll give it a go. And I said, because the subconscious is an image processor, how would you make a video of the speech going well? And she thought about it. Then she said, oh, I know. We've all done our speeches. Nothing special, but it's all finished. But there's 10 minutes to go before the bell. And the teacher said, look, we've got 10 minutes to kill. Would you like to hear one of the speeches again? And the whole class said, can we hear Abby's speech? So she said, I'm doing it again just as an encore, just to fit in time before the bell goes. That was the little video she ran just in a sort of a head for about a week every time it crossed her mind. She said when she stood up to do her speech, she could not free her mind of the fact she had already done it. And she just rattled through it again. Class gave her 20 out of, the teacher gave her 30 out of 30, the class gave her 29 out of 30. I talked to the teacher at a parent night about 6 months later and asked her to remember Abby's speech. And she said, what's funny you should do, you should ask, because I do, because it wasn't the presentation of a teenager. It's like watching something off the telly. Now, we hadn't worried about technique because I know that all teenage girls are born performers, which puts me in mind a couple of years ago, I had to appear before Justice Davison in the High Court in Auckland. And it was interesting how I sat outside that court waiting to be called, but I was running a constant picture of finishing up in the witness box and stepping away from it and feeling really great. Because I knew I was going to get pretty heavily grilled by the QC who on the other side. So the key thing about this, though, is belief is utterly and completely irrelevant. People say you've got to believe it. But computers don't have to believe the software they run in order to run it. They run whatever they get. If they get a virus, they'll try and run it. If the virus is going to destroy it, the computer, it'll destroy it. Our brain's exactly the same. I find so many people are running viruses. I can't do this, I can't do that. I'm hopeless at this. And you start to listen to those conversations, and all they are computer viruses. And so belief is irrelevant. And when we look at there's, I'm not going to go through all of these key things. One of these lovely acronyms, praises, but the first thing has got to be what you're moving towards. So if you're having a problem with names, you start saying to yourself, I'm brilliant on names. Even though it's complete bullshit, as you start saying it, you begin to form new neural pathways in the brain. Because every second you form 1 million synaptic connections. The only reason you can remember what you did yesterday or the day before is because you've changed the structure of your brain. You've formed those new connections. Unless you're like my dear old mum, she passed away in December. She was 90 years old. And I'm pleased she actually did, because if she'd been alive during lockdown, it would have been awful. But her short-term memory was completely gone. So no past, no future. But she was really happy because she was living in the moment. That, I love managing X. I feel calm and relaxed. How many of you are saying to yourself all the time, I feel calm and relaxed? Even though, like I said, it's complete rubbish, by the time you said it 20 or 30 times, it starts to feel different because you're changing the structure of your brain. In the same way, if you're going to run a half marathon, you have an end goal, and then you do your training runs, because you've got to change the structure of your body in order to help you to achieve that goal. You don't have to believe the body's going to change or work out how it's going to change. All you have to do is keep doing it. And the brain's exactly the same. If your end goal, for example, is to to always feel calm and relaxed, have fabulous relationships, that you've got to then do the work. I had a guy in my office this morning, and he's going to resign from his job. And I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, I don't know, because he's not happy where he is. And I said, okay, as long as you're saying I don't know, you're never going to find a solution. So I've got him saying, I'm thrilled with the fantastic job I found. Now I said to him, I don't know what that means, and neither do you. But by the time you said it 20 or 30 times, you'll lower the threat level, and that will allow your creativity to kick in, and suddenly things will come out of left field, and it'll feel completely different. Instead of feeling anxious, you'll stop feeling anxious. The next thing is it's realistic. You can't say, I'm thrilled to win lotto, because that is not controlled by your behavior. But you can say that I get on brilliantly with X, or I love dealing with Y. Because your subconscious, like you said, is much more intelligent than you are. And so that's, most of you will have struck a problem, you've let it go, you stop thinking about it, and then an idea pops into your head. Most of the great inventions have come. You've got 100 billion nerve cells and 500 trillion synaptic connections. There's more synaptic connections in your brain than there are grains of sand on the planet. That takes some thinking about. And the key thing, like I've got in the slide there, the brain you woke up with this morning is not the brain you have now. It has changed every second. And so it's about understanding and how to utilize that change process. The next thing, it's achieved. The brain doesn't handle future conditionals. You can't say, I will do something. So that's got to be in the past or present tense. For example, I always sleep well and wake refreshed. I'm amazed how quickly I finished the report. I'm thrilled how well the meeting went before you've gone into the meeting. So what you're doing is creating a very clear picture of the end result that you're seeking. The more specific you make it as well. The brain, a colleague of mine, who was a general manager, he was going to do the Boston Marathon. And I said, well, what's your time? What are you going for? And he said, about 3.5 or something. I said, well, how about make it 3:15? He said, I couldn't do that. And I said, no, it's just a number. Just visualize yourself going through the gate 3:15. Now, that was about 4 or 5 years ago. And I was working with him recently, doing some training for his organization. And we'd finished the discussion. And I was just about to go. And he said, oh, hang on. And he grabbed his cell phone and he showed me a photograph. And he's running through the finishing gate at 3:14:59. And he said to me, I'd forgotten about that number. But it was very specific. His subconscious had a very clear picture. So that's a really critical part. And the same thing with reprogramming others. Interesting, my youngest daughter, she turned 40 in the weekend just gone by, but she's a primary school teacher. And the headmaster went through her class last year, and he came out and he said, your kids are weird. And I said, what do you mean? Well, they're all quiet, they're all working away, this is the new entrants. And she said, no, I'll just hypnotize them all. And he said, what do you mean? Well, she says, I never ask the kids to do anything, and I never tell the kids to do anything. The way she always phrases it is, I love the way you always sit quietly. I love the way you always put your books away neatly. I love the way you two always play nicely together. So kids want to be loved. So what she's doing is putting that love word there, but then she's putting after that a very clear picture. And it's a subconscious hack. She's bypassing the conscious mind and going straight to the subconscious. I won't go into it now, but women used it with 3 teenage girls to get them to tidy up their room. So it's a biological process, not a psychological one. And we're running these every day. Every day you're talking to yourself, you're running hundreds of affirmations, but the problem is they tend to be negative. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to work out how they're going to be delivered. But the thing is, what's the alternative? And I'd just like to leave you with one final lovely wee story. A manager came to see me about one of his staff, and he said, I just find her so frustrating to deal with. And I said to him, okay, right. I said, can you say it again? But this time, instead of the word frustrating, use the word fascinating. And he said, I find her so fascinating to deal with. And then he stopped dead and he went, oh, I find her fascinating to deal with. And then he said it then he said it 3 times. And then he held his hand out. And I said, what's that? And he said, now he's a bug in a bottle. It was actually a she. I've changed the wording there. But now he's a bug in a bottle. And he got up and said, that's it, sorted, I'm off. Another bit strange. I rang him about a month later to see how I was getting on. And the first thing he said to me is, I'm sleeping at night. I'm looking forward to coming to work, and I'm watching my bug like a hawk. But the word frustrating activates the brain stem, and that's the fight or flight part of the brain. Will never move you towards a solution. The word fascinating activates the neocortex. So when you're dealing with stress, it's interesting how changing one word can change the way we feel. And that's all I have to say. Do we have any questions?